exercises as part of broader maritime exercises this month and next. Do you consider this to be a part of the troop buildup that you've criticized in recent days, or recent weeks? And regardless, does the U.S. have any concern about destabilizing action at the Kerch Strait or elsewhere in the region? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific on the Kerch Strait. Kerch Strait. Sorry, I'll try that. Kerch Strait. But we continue to see an accumulation of Russian military power again around and alongside the borders with Ukraine and Belarus, and I mentioned this the other day, and naval power in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic, and clearly the Black Sea. So I can't speak to their exercise. They should be able to talk to their exercises the way I just did at the top of this briefing. But we have noted and continue to watch increasing naval developments on the Russian side as well. All of this activity is what leads to our concern over Russian intentions here, which, again, as always, remain opaque. David Martin, CBS.
John, you said entirely likely that if there is a plus-up in Europe, some of that plus-up could come from troops that are already there. I should say plus-up on the eastern flank of Europe. Some of that plus-up could come from troops already in Europe. Have any units in Europe been given prepared to deploy orders?
Many of the rotational troops are already on a heightened posture, David. I believe that General Walters is taking prudent steps to make sure that if we need to move forces from inside Europe to other places in Europe, in Allied territory, that he's ready to do that. The prepare to deploy orders that I spoke about the other day, again, were confined to U.S. domestic units. But as I said to Sylvie, we're absolutely not ruling out the possibility that forces in Europe could also be moved in to help bolster the capabilities of NATO allies. And again, some of these units are already on a heightened state of readiness. I don't know of specific orders that General Walters has given to increase the readiness posture of other units in Europe. But again, I just want to go back to a core principle here. We take our NATO commitment seriously, and we're going to be consulting with allies as we have been, certainly in coming days. And if there's ways in which we can help bolster their capabilities to help their defensive postures, we're going to take a serious look at that. And not all of that has to come or necessarily will come just from stateside. Yeah, Tom.
John, I have three quick follow-ups to questions asked earlier. One, on just what you said about General Walters. Does he have the ability to put troops on heightened alert without the Secretary doing it? In other words, Secretary Austin did the orders for here. General Walters can do that under Europe?
As the combatant commander at European Command, he can move forces around intra-theater at his own discretion, yes. Okay. I think, though, you can understand that when we're talking about an issue of this importance, that there is a constant dialogue between General Walters and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as well as the Secretary. So I wouldn't expect there to be any surprises. The Secretary can also order posture changes in Europe because he is at the top of the chain of command. So it's, I know we like to, not you, but some people like to just, go to what exactly can the commander do without permission. There are things he can do, but again, with a situation like what we're talking about today, there's a lot of cross-pollination and talking.
I wasn't trying to do this.
I know you weren't. I just wanted to make that point.
And the other two follow-ups real quick. On the F-35 that Louis brought up, Chinfo was a little bit opaque in responding as to whether that any other nation can actually get the F-35. It's under my impression that that's U.S. territory, U.S. property, and no one else can sort of salvage that. What's your understanding of that?
I'm not a lawyer, but it is U.S. property, and the Navy is going to make an attempt to recover it.
Okay, and finally, One of Jen's questions regarding anti-aircraft weapons, and you don't want to disclose everything. In the briefing earlier this week, you said one of the key reasons troops may go to Eastern Europe to bolster our allies there is to show the Russians the determination and to sort of dissuade them perhaps of adventurism. Would not the Russians, knowing that there's some anti-aircraft weapons aiming at their potential planes, help dissuade them from attacking?
Look, there's lots of things that we would like to dissuade them from doing what they clearly have the capability to do. I'm not going to speak about specific systems. I just won't do that, Tom. But the United States has been nothing but clear about the importance of Russia not conducting another incursion into Ukraine and the consequences that would come from that. At the same time, we have two other responsibilities that we take seriously. One is, of course, to NATO and to our Article 5 commitments inside the alliance. And number two is to helping through security assistance, helping the Ukrainian armed forces better defend themselves. We are just at the beginning of a whole new package of assistance material. As I said, there's been 3 shipments. There are more that'll be coming. We're trying to see if we can accelerate them. We're not going to detail what is in each and every shipment, but there will be both defensive and offensive capabilities inside those shipments. Mike.
Yeah, John, about the NATO response force. I'm interested in it as an organization. Who will command it? I know it's under the control of SACEUR, but who actually will command it?
I want to go back. When I said defensive and offense, what I meant was lethal and non-lethal. But poor choice of words on my part. In the shipments, both lethal and non-lethal assistance.
Both offensive and defensive.
Well, all designed to help Ukraine defend itself.
Thanks. Sorry, Mike.
That is what I meant to say. I'm glad I had a chance to correct that.
So who will command the NATO response force? Is it an ad hoc unit? Is it like a permanent unit with a structure and a location, or is it an ad hoc creation that gets sort of formed as it's needed? Or?
Ultimately, it's under the command of SACEUR, in this case, General Walters. It has not been activated, and so the exact C2 relationships, I think, have yet to be worked out, and in the case that we get there, Mike, that's really a better question put to our colleagues at the alliance. It's an alliance structure.
That France is going to be.
I don't think they've gotten that far yet, since it hasn't been activated in terms of what the chain of command is going to be.
That they control it this year, and
again, Mike, you're asking the wrong guy. I'm not an expert on how the NATO response force is activated and what the C2 looks like, command and control looks like. I'd point you to my colleagues in Brussels.
For the 8,500 Americans, will there be an overall American officer in charge? I assume it's mostly Army and Air Force from the bases that you've said. Is there going to be the whole? Is it all 85 going to possibly go over there? Will they be doled out?
The 8,500 comprise our contribution to the NATO response force, and there are, as I said at the opening, there's a myriad of capabilities in there. Everything from medical support to ground forces. If they're activated, how they're activated, and whether it's all in one chunk or piecemeal based on what the alliance feels it needs the NRF to actually look like, I think is just yet to be determined. Yeah, Oren.
On civilian casualties, other than the review of the March 2019 strike in Baghuz, Syria, are there other open reviews or investigations of potential incidents of civilian casualties? And was there any review opened up after the recent U.S. and coalition strikes related to supporting the SDF near Hasaka prison?
I'm not aware of any other open investigations or reviews of allegations of civilian harm, and that would include the ongoing operation right now in Syria around the Hasaka prison. Yeah, Ellie.
John, the president said he's not putting troops in Ukraine, but there are members, as you mentioned, of the Florida National Guard there right now. Is there any update to bringing them home? And if Russia invades, would it be too late to get them out?
There's been no decision at this point to change their mission or their status, their posture inside Ukraine. The members of the Florida National Guard are still there in an advisory and training capacity. As I've said many times, their safety and security remains a paramount concern to the Secretary, and if and when we believe that for that safety and security, a decision needs to be made about moving them, the Secretary will not hesitate to do so. We are in constant communication with their chain of command, certainly with General Walters, about his assessment of what's going on the ground. I wouldn't get ahead of decisions that haven't been made yet. But again, their safety and security is going to be a chief concern for the Secretary, and we're going to take their protection and their safety very seriously. It is not a very big number. I think it's around less than 200. So in the event that they had to be moved, we believe that that could be done in a fairly expeditious manner.
I was just curious because I know they're asking some Americans to leave Ukraine, so I didn't know why wouldn't they be included in that?
Well, the State Department has made it clear to American citizens, civilians, that this is not the time to be going to Ukraine, and if they're in Ukraine, they're encouraging them to leave. I think you saw that they also have authorized the departure of, ordered the departure of some eligible family members, but our diplomats are still at work in Kyiv, and our trainers are still at work in Ukraine. We're going to watch this every single day. I can't speak for my State Department colleagues, but here at DOD, if and when the Secretary decides that it's time to move them out, we'll do that. And again, the numbers are not that big. This would not be a huge undertaking to do.
And if I may, just one more. The number two at the State Department projected yesterday that there could be an invasion by mid-February. Are you seeing that same intelligence? And if so, how are you making preparations around that intelligence?
I'm not going to speculate on timing. We've always said, and said for quite some time, that another incursion by Russia could be imminent. And imminent means imminent. So we're watching this every single day, and I think I'm just gonna avoid the temptation to guess as to what the timing would be. The only thing I'd add is we still don't believe that there's been a final decision by Mr. Putin to launch another invasion. We still believe here at the department that there is time and space for diplomacy. I think you saw Secretary Blinken, they talked about this just the other day, and the State Department has, in fact, responded with some written responses to the Russians, and so we're waiting to hear their feedback on that. So we still think there's time and space for diplomacy. I think, obviously, that's the preferred path here, to de-escalate in a peaceful, calm way and destabilize without any shots being fired. But we're watching it every single day.
Hey, John, sorry to interrupt, but you said to Ellie that it's imminent, and you said to Jen it's possibly imminent. Which is it?
Imminent.
Okay. Thank you.
But by imminent, I don't mean I'm telling you it's going to happen tomorrow. We've long said that,
I realize that.
an incursion could be imminent.
That's why I like to make sure we're speaking the same definition.
I think that's always a good idea, Tom. But again, we're not going to be predicting here from the podium. We still believe there's time and space for diplomacy. We'd like to see a de-escalation. We'd like to see those troops go back home, and we'd like Mr. Putin to take the right steps to de-escalate the tensions. Okay, I think I got everybody. Thanks very much.